Okay, so once upon a time, a long, long time ago, in the south of China, there lived a teacher. And he was an oldish man with a long grey beard and long grey hair. And the grey hair he used to tie up. These days, I think that teacher would be a woman. But in those days, I think the teacher was a man. It's a long grey beard, grey hair that he tied up. And he was a very popular teacher. All his students loved him. And the reason he was a popular teacher is because he didn't say much. He'd ask questions and then he'd just wait for an answer. And when he heard an answer he liked, he nodded his head. But if he was in Bulgaria, he would shake his head, wouldn't he? And if he heard an answer he didn't like, he shook his head. But if he was in Bulgaria, he would nod his head, wouldn't he? Yeah. So he just would listen and he'd nod or shake, and the students would change what they were saying depending on how he responded to them. And there was a lot of respect both ways. And one day he said to his students, he used to do little things, he used to do little strange things, and one day he said to his students, he said, "Students, tomorrow, if you can set me a puzzle or a riddle or some kind of something like that, puzzle or a riddle that I can't answer, I will give you tomorrow afternoon off." And the kids were like, "Oh, wow, we'll get tomorrow afternoon off, we've got to find a puzzle." So they all went home from school and they asked their mums and they asked their dads and they tried to think of a puzzle or a riddle that they could come back to school with the next day. And when they got back to school the next day, there was a little buzz, a little hum, they were excited and they were hoping that the teacher remembered their homework. And he came into class and he said, "Right, I set you homework. What was your homework?" And they said, "We've got riddles for you." And he said, "Okay, so come on, so the first one." And a little girl stood up and she said, "What has 4 fingers and a thumb and is not a hand?" If you know the answers to these, don't shout them out, but I'll ask you in a minute, okay? So the teacher stroked his long beard and he scratched his head. And he thought for a minute, and there was a little buzz of excitement. "Oh, we're going to get the afternoon off, we're going to get the afternoon off." And then the teacher went, "I know." And he said, 4 fingers and a thumb, but it's not a hand? It's a glove. Ah, the kids all, "Oh, we're not going to get the afternoon." So then a little boy stood up, and the little boy stood up and he said, "I've got one. What belongs to you, but is used more by other people?" And again, the teacher stroked his long beard and scratched his head and stroked his long beard and scratched his head. And the kids were like, "Oh, we're going to get the afternoon off, we're going to get the afternoon off." And then he said, "Ah!" And he said, "What belongs to you?" Yeah, belongs to you, but used more by other people. A name. Oh, we're not going to get the afternoon. Another kid stood up, little girl this time again. And she said, "I've got one. What has 2 hands and a face, but is not a person or is not an animal?" And again, there was the long stroke of the beard and the scratch of the head and the scratch of the head and the stroke of the beard. And they were thinking, "Oh, we're going to get the afternoon off." And then the teacher went, "Ah, it's a clock. Oh, we're not going to get the afternoon." So this went on all morning. One after the other, they asked their question until there was one little girl left at the back. And the little girl who was left at the back stood up. And the teacher was a little bit nervous because his best friend was the little girl's father. And the little girl's father was the storyteller of the village, the person that told stories. And the teacher and the storyteller often sat chatting away over a glass of rice wine, setting each other little puzzles. So he knew when the little girl stood up, the teacher knew he was going to be in trouble here. And she came forward with a box. And she put the box on the desk and she opened the box. And inside the box were 3 dolls. And they looked exactly the same. And she said to the teacher, "What's the difference between those 3 dolls?" And the teacher stroked his long beard and scratched his head. And scratched his head and stroked his long beard. And he picked up the first doll and looked at it. And he picked up the second doll and he looked at it. And he picked up the third doll and he looked at it. And then he looked out of the window and he saw exactly where the sun was and he said, "Class, it's break time. Go outside and play." And he looked at the dolls again and then he got his colleagues in. And the PE teacher came in and the PE teacher juggled them. Yeah? And then the maths teacher came in and measured them. And then the English teacher came in and spoke to them. But none of them could find a difference between the 3 dolls. And so when the class came back in, they had to say, I'm sorry, but I can't find the difference. Yes, we're going to get the afternoon off. But before you go, we need to find out. So he invited the little girl forward. And she picked up the first doll. And she leant forward and plucked a hair from the teacher's beard. Ow! Said the teacher. Sorry, she said. And she took the hair and she put it into the ear of the first doll. And it went in and down and stayed inside. Murmured the class. And then she picked up the second doll. And she reached forward and she plucked the hair out of the teacher's beard. Ow! Said the teacher. She took that hair, she put it into the ear of the second doll, and you know what? It came out of the other ear. Straight through. And then she picked up the third doll. And the teacher moved back. But she was too quick and she plucked the hair. Ow! She took the hair and she put it into the ear of the third doll. And you know what? It came out of the mouth. Ooh, went the class. Ooh, went the teacher. Said the girl. And the teacher said, but before you go, we need to know why. Why? What's the symbol between these 3 dolls? Why does one go inside? Why does one go straight through? Why does one come out the mouth? There must be a reason. And the little girl said, the first doll, where the hair goes in, it goes down inside, and that shows the wise person. The wise person can take in information and can keep it inside them. The second one, where the hair went in and came out the other side, shows the foolish person. The person who doesn't listen. The information goes in one ear and comes out of the other. And the third one shows, well, that's the storyteller. The information goes in and then comes out. Yeah? But of course, the teacher said, well, no, I disagree. I think the first one is the selfish person. They hear things, but they don't share it. Yeah, they keep it for themselves. The second one is the clever one. The one that doesn't listen to everything. Knows when not to listen, knows when to listen. And the third one is the gossip. The one that tells stories. Comes in and goes out. But all the kids, they weren't listening by now. Because they knew that they'd won the bet and they wanted to go home. So he said, okay, you can go home. So, one thing I didn't tell you about that. So I want you to think about during this talk. One thing I didn't tell you, that when that hair went in through the ear and came out of the mouth, it came out curly. It went in straight. Why? What's the difference?